Thousands of American agents were on the hunt, yet their target was just one man: Saddam Hussein. After the fall of Baghdad in 2003, the US military had taken the city, toppled the regime, and ended Saddam's 24-year rule. But there was one problem: the man himself had vanished. How do you catch a dictator who knows every hiding place in Iraq, who has loyalists everywhere, and who might already be dead? This is not just the story of a capture, this is a psychological hunt. A battle of patience, strategy, and one crucial mistake. What led the US to a tiny hole in the ground, where Saddam Hussein, once the most powerful man in Iraq, waited in silence? And who was the unlikely man behind the discovery that changed the course of history? This is the true story of how Saddam Hussein was captured after 32 weeks underground, and why a simple dish of fish played a role no one could have predicted. Saddam's capture wasn't just a military achievement, it was a global spectacle, symbolizing the collapse of a regime, or simply buried by a loyal network that had served him for decades, and the pursuit of justice after 9/11. The operation was massive, the methods unconventional, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. Millions watched as headlines speculated his whereabouts. Was he in Syria? Dead in a bombing raid? Each card showed the face of a top Iraqi official. Saddam Hussein was the ace of spades. These cards weren't just games, they were daily reminders of the targets. The truth, as it turns out, was far stranger and far more strategic than anyone expected. The infamous statue of Saddam Hussein in Firdos Square was pulled down live on television. Iraq was a maze of tribal loyalties, secretive networks, and decades of authoritarian rule that had taught people to hide, lie, and survive. For many, that moment symbolized the fall of a dictator, but the man himself, gone without a trace. No location was off limits. Mosques, schools, marketplaces, farms, flyers were dropped across cities, announcements were broadcast on radio, and photos were plastered on walls. But despite the publicity, real leads were rare. Everyone wanted the money, and many Iraqis were desperate. False reports flooded in, sending teams on wild goose chases that drained morale and time. They interrogated family members, loyalists, and anyone suspected of harboring secrets. But still, no sign of Saddam. A local informant claimed Uday and Kaysay were hiding in his home. US troops surrounded the building and confirmed the identity of the two men. When they refused to surrender, a gunfight erupted, followed by a missile strike. The brothers were killed, and no obvious resources still managed to elude one of the most advanced militaries on Earth. Every commander knew that without capturing him, the war could never truly end. If even his sons weren't with him, where was he? US commanders had hoped the sons would lead them directly to Saddam, or at least be carrying clues. But their phones were clean, and their hideout gave up no secrets. With Saddam still at large, the search escalated into one of the largest manhunts in US history. Intelligence agencies like the CIA, NSA, FBI, and the Defense Intelligence Agency were working around the clock. He trusted only a tiny circle, and he had long prepared for the possibility of going underground. His network was rooted in family ties, tribal loyalty, and decades of absolute control. Thousands of troops were deployed across Iraq, operating in the shadows, chasing whispers. Within just 3 weeks, coalition forces had stormed Baghdad. The longer he stayed hidden, the more dangerous he became, not just physically, but symbolically. He remained a rallying figure for insurgents and loyalists who still believed he might return. The world watched in awe as Saddam's regime collapsed in real time. Instead, they found empty halls, abandoned bunkers, and secret tunnels leading nowhere. It was as if he had vanished into smoke. That's when the mission changed. From taking down a government to capturing a ghost, when the United States launched its invasion of Iraq in March 2003, the strategy was swift and overwhelming. On April 9th, 2003, American tanks rolled into the Iraqi capital. The US expected to find Saddam in his palaces. To track Saddam, the military created an unconventional tool, a deck of 52 playing cards. The manhunt became personal. Soldiers studied the cards during downtime, memorizing every face. It wasn't just war, it was a hunt, and Saddam was the ultimate prize. But even with the military's superior firepower, they quickly realized they were in unfamiliar territory. Some believed Saddam had escaped to Syria. Others thought he had gone underground. Intelligence reports flooded in, but they were riddled with contradictions, half-truths, and dead ends. In response, US forces unleashed thousands of raids across the country. As days turned to weeks, the urgency grew. By the end of April 2003, the mission was clear: find Saddam Hussein at all costs. To encourage tips, the US government announced massive rewards: $25 million for Saddam and $15 million for each of his two sons, Uday and Kaysay. The problem wasn't effort, it was accuracy. Most of the tips were based on rumors or personal vendettas. Then came a breakthrough war, so it seemed. It was a major blow to Saddam's inner circle, but it didn't bring the answers they hoped for. The death of Uday and Qusay was both a triumph and a dead end. Meanwhile, frustration grew within the intelligence community. How could a man with no formal army, no public support? Part of the answer lay in Saddam's past. He had built a nation on fear and survival. So while Americans searched for intelligence in city streets and government files, Saddam relied on silence. No intercepted calls, no satellite hits, no traces. The manhunt dragged on. Months passed. Some officials feared Saddam had already died in a bombing raid or had escaped the country altogether. Others believed he was hiding in plain sight. Saddam's power didn't come from his ministers. His ministers derived their power from Saddam. And in hiding, Saddam wouldn't trust politicians or generals. He would rely on those who had protected him. The longest his bodyguards, using body doubles or shifting location every night. But one thing was certain. As long as he remained at large, Saddam remained a symbol of resistance. Who had cooked for Saddam? Who cleaned his rooms? Who carried messages when the phones went silent? These weren't high-ranking officers. They were drivers, aides, cousins, and cooks. Then came a subtle clue, a passing mention of Saddam's favorite dish, a grilled river fish called but through patient questioning, he discovered the man was a cousin of an Iraqi guerrilla fighter, believed to be taking orders from none other than Muhammad Ibrahim. Instead, he made an offer. Safety and U.S. citizenship for Ibrahim's family if he cooperated. According to Ibrahim, Saddam rarely moved and trusted only a handful of people. Days passed. Then, slowly, Ibrahim began to speak. He wasn't busting down doors with elite units, he was listening, connecting dots, and quietly building a psychological map of Saddam's last loyal links. A voice followed. "I am Saddam Hussein, the president of Iraq." Inside was the man Maddox had been chasing, Muhammad Ibrahim himself. The most feared man in Iraq, once seen on gold-framed portraits across the nation, now emerged from a hole in the ground, disheveled, bearded, and powerless. Both looked deserted, but something felt off. Ibrahim, now assisting the operation, pointed to the ground near one farmhouse. There were no weapons of mass destruction, no grand escape plans, just remnants of a man in hiding. He offered no final stand, no dramatic speech, just quiet resignation. Within hours, the footage of Saddam's capture was broadcast around the world. Iraqis danced in the streets. Others watched in disbelief. For some, it was justice. For others, the beginning of a new and uncertain chapter. The man who once ruled with absolute authority now looked like a forgotten prisoner of war. A thin rope was barely visible, disappearing into the dirt. Ibrahim was gone. With Muhammad Ibrahim in custody, the U.S. finally had their best chance. But he wasn't going to talk easily. He was loyal, seasoned, and had resisted interrogation before. But the location itself led to another relative. Slowly, a chain of connections emerged. Rumors that hadn't shown up on any official list. Was nothing special until Maddox connected it to something else. Ibrahim's son had said his father owned a fish farm in Simera. His very existence was a rallying cry for insurgents. While most intelligence officers chased Saddam's former ministers and generals, one man took a different path: Sergeant Eric Maddox from the Defense Intelligence Agency. Instead of looking for high-profile names, he dug into Saddam's inner circle of security personnel. Many had vanished, but one name kept coming up: Muhammad Ibrahim, a senior bodyguard and longtime confidant. Maddox noticed something no one else had questioned. What if they were chasing the wrong people? This realization took Maddox to Saddam's hometown. Maddox found and interrogated Ibrahim's son, but the father was missing. That was it, a thread to pull, and relentless interrogation. Every interview, every conversation was like assembling a jigsaw puzzle without knowing the picture. When Maddox reached the farm, Maddox's approach was unconventional, but it was working. He wasn't using advanced tech or intercepts. He was using human instincts, cultural understanding. He kept asking questions others had stopped asking. That focus paid off. At the fish farm, Maddox encountered a seemingly irrelevant individual, someone who appeared disconnected from Saddam's network. From there, Maddox tracked a trail through multiple small towns and family homes. Eventually, one of those links led to a dilapidated house in Baghdad, the man who knew where Saddam Hussein was hiding. The final thread was in hand. Eric Maddox knew he couldn't rely on threats or force. He revealed Saddam was hiding in a town called Ador, not far from Tikrit. It was rural, quiet, surrounded by farmland, ideal for going underground. Maddox and a small team moved quickly. They scouted the area, watching two small farmhouses along the Tigris River. Troops closed in and uncovered a small hidden entrance, covered with foam and buried under debris. They had found a spider hole. One soldier prepared to toss a grenade. Until two hands emerged from the darkness. After 32 weeks of searching, they had found him. But the moment wasn't just a tactical victory, it was a psychological climax. The soldiers who pulled him out were stunned. Saddam didn't resist. Inside the spider hole, U.S. troops found a pistol, a few candies, cities, some cash, and a stack of personal writings. Word spread quickly. Maddox's unconventional approach, trusting instincts over tech, questioning the overlooked, and listening rather than demanding, had achieved what months of brute force had failed to do. The mission that had begun with a nation's invasion ended in silence. In a hole beside a quiet river, the ghost had been found. The capture of Saddam Hussein wasn't just the end of a manhunt. It was a global turning point. For months, his absence had loomed large, fueling resistance, conspiracies, and doubt. But now, the image of Saddam unarmed, weary, and pulled from the earth told a different story. Medical tests were performed on the spot. DNA was taken. His identity confirmed. He was transported to a secure location, and the US government announced the news to the world. President George W. Bush addressed the nation. The capture of Saddam Hussein does not mean the end of violence in Iraq, he warned, but it is a turning point. The former dictator will face the justice he denied to millions. Iraqis reacted in waves. Some celebrated in the streets, others remained skeptical, many were simply stunned. But for the US military, intelligence agencies, and especially Eric Maddox, it marked the climax of a mission built on perseverance and unconventional thinking. This wasn't the end of Iraq's conflict, but it was the end of Saddam Hussein as a symbol of defiance. His method wasn't built on gadgets or drones, it was built on empathy, curiosity, and relentless focus. Justice, once unimaginable for many Iraqis, suddenly felt real. The world watched Saddam receive a medical check, open his mouth for a flashlight exam, and blink under the harsh lights. He was discovered hiding in a hole just a few miles from where his power once seemed unshakable. The weapons of mass destruction that had justified the war were never found, an admission even President Bush would later confirm. And subscribe for more true stories that reveal the unseen side of history. His image disheveled, broken, became the visual symbol of regime collapse. In the months that followed, Saddam Hussein stood trial for crimes against humanity. He was sentenced to death and executed in 2006. Iraq's future, however, remained uncertain. History would remember the man in the spider hole. News agencies replayed the footage on a loop, no longer the iron-fisted ruler. Saddam was now a prisoner awaiting trial. It was over. Despite the removal of its former dictator, the country soon fell into sectarian conflict, insurgencies, and political instability. But for Sergeant Eric Maddox, the capture was more than history. It was proof that listening, observing, and adapting can achieve what brute force cannot. Maddox's work became a case study in modern intelligence gathering, influencing operations for years to come. In the end, Saddam Hussein wasn't found in a palace or foreign country. That, perhaps, is the most telling detail of all. Thank you for watching. If you found this story powerful, like the video, share it with others.